रिकॉर्डिंग तो हो रहा है जो ठीक है शुरू
Good evening, everyone. After a brief interlude, the JNU Academic is back again. On behalf of the forum, I, Pankaj Kumar, would like to welcome you all to today's discussion. As all of you know, JNU Academic is an independent platform for students of JNU. As a group, we strive to enrich the graduate community by organizing talks and discussions on themes that are of social relevance. We apologize for holding very few events in the past. We could not hold both due to the so we could not hold many events due to the hot, humid, and irritating weather, and also because many members of the forum have left JNU. Since now we have new lot of energetic and passionate volunteers, so we hope to organize frequent events in the future, and for that we need your money. So please donate as much as you can, either through UPI or cash. So today we have gathered. As much as you can, not as much as you wish. Wish to that's today, today we have gathered here to discuss Professor Dopayan Bhattacharya's new article published in EPW titled as Of Conflict and Collaboration, Mamta Banerjee and the Making of Franchisee Politics in West Bengal. That is why the title of the talk is kept as Franchising Politics, Explaining Bengal and Understanding India to invite the audience. So before we formally begin the discussion, let me introduce the theme and the significance of the discussion apart from introducing the panelists. If one wishes to understand how far our conventional imaginary surrounding the role and purpose of politics, the nature of the state, and styles of leadership has changed, one cannot afford not to read this article. From a saintly model of politics, we have reached to a beastly model of politics in which violence and killing of people are seen as a necessary for political transactions. As a result, politics has become a new avenue for generating wealth and providing employment at a mass level. Naturally, when politics becomes a high-stake gamble, franchisee modality is the natural byproduct of such kind of politics. While one can grudgingly discard these transformations as a corrupt and unethical one, we social scientists do not have the luxury to fall into that trap. Therefore, this work forces us to rethink about questions of democracy, electoral politics, nature of simultaneous imaginary, and the role of the state itself. The claim that crony capitalism is not only the reserve of corporate capital, but also permeates the non-corporate capital, or what we call need economy, is the most insightful of claims in the article. Hence, the transformation of the need economy from a site of cooperation and trust to a highly competitive site wherein violence and killing are as significant as cooperation and trust for transactions and benefit will surely bewilder us and demand our attention. Two, there are certain methodological insights that I would like to bring to the table, and they are three. One, comprehending and understanding a fleeting, constantly changing reality is a very demanding, at a time, very dangerous task. So to theorize the present, any theorization needs to be open to different possibilities and willing to change their own position. Seen in this light, those who have read Professor Dopayan Bhattacharya earlier articles on Bengal politics and the centrality of party society in his conceptualization would find the franchisee modality of politics as a major departure from his earlier conceptualization. While critics might find solace in the falsification of his formulation, for young scholars like us, it only showcases that the very obsession with finding an undiluted continuity in any theories, especially like Professor Bhattacharya, is not a productive exercise all the time. This this is not an urge to become a Skinnerian, but due to the task at hand itself, which is to theorize the present. Secondly, the article manifests Dopayan's rare ability to combine the ethnographic details with other equally essential data sets to arrive at a more plausible and holistic formulation. And third, related to the second one, it is a fabulous example of blending the structure with process with personality in a very complex way. It manifests that a solid theoretical exercise need to need to be beware of lapsing into binaries such as those of culture versus material, economic versus symbolic, social versus political, and so on and so forth. Instead, one needs to integrate them in a complex whole without losing the specificity and autonomy of each of these domains. Having said so, there are two central issues that the article for me gives rise to. One, is the franchisee model of politics compatible with our democratic commitments? Or is it the case that such transactional and extractive style of politics is itself a form of democratization, something akin to the democratization of corruption, the thesis of democratization of corruption, which commentators like Jeffrey Witso have propounded? In a word, what implication does the franchisee model of politics have for a democratic theory? And two, why are parties and governments so central for people of Bengal at a time when the neoliberal refashioning of the selves and the ideas about the legitimate function of the state appears to be completely transformed? Does the logic of survival still govern the franchisee politics, or is it more about seeking as much power as one can have? So, with this note, let me formally introduce our esteemed panelists for the day. Keeping in mind the dense discussion that is going to be followed, I have prepared the introduction, which is a bit, bit witty and humorous to make the audience comfortable. So please, please keep it in that spirit only. So the main speaker of today's event is Professor Dopain Bhattacharya. He is a professor at the Center of Political Studies. His areas of interest lie in democratic theory, political processes, and politics in India, especially on left-wing mobilization in West Bengal. His publications include a monograph titled Government as Practice, Democratic Left in the Transforming India from University of Cambridge Press in 2016, and an edited book titled Interrogating Social Capital, the Indian Experiment, published in 2004. While Bhattacharya is a prolific theoretician and a teacher, he is also a very miser in terms of publications. So most of us who are taught by him or listen to him always ask this question: Why has he written so less? इतना कम क्यों लिखा है? And the only explanation that we have is that we simply don't know. So I think in each center of JNU, you will find such academicians who would have written very less. So in that sense, while CHS had Niladri Bhattacharya, CPS had its own Bhattacharya. So the first discussant of the event is Dr. Ajay Bravarti. He is an associate professor at the Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. His publications include Politics of Post-Civil Society, Contemporary History of Political Movements in India 2013, Maoism, Democracy and Globalization, Cross Currents in Indian Politics 2014, India After Modi, Populism and the Right 2018. His most recent book, which we discussed earlier from our forum, is Politics, Ethics and Emotions in New India. Dr. Gudavarti is known for his teaching and popular courses that he offers at the center, and his intervention in a public intellectual in a popular and popular media. So very few public intellectuals in India write so frequently, so eloquently, and so provocatively as Ajay does. So while in the case of Professor Davapayan, writing less is a matter of discussion. In the case of it's quite the opposite. इतना कैसे लिख लेते हैं? कुछ छोड़ दो हमारे लिए. So, and the second and the last discussion of the session is yeah, we have something for you as well. So Dr. Praskanva Sinha Roy is currently a senior research associate at the Center for Financial Accountability New Delhi. Earlier, he has worked with the Election Commission of India, Oxford University Press, and the Center for Policy Research. And we know why he left. So he has a PhD from Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, and wherein he worked with Professor Dopayan. His doctoral research looks at the caste and politics in contemporary West Bengal through an ethnographic study of organizational politics of Mathura community, which will come in our discussion. His work has been instrumental in aiding to the growing literature on caste in West Bengal, something which has been left unexplored for many years. So before inviting our panelists today, I will just outline the format of today's discussion. Professor Bhattacharya would speak first for about 15 minutes. Then the two discussants, Dr. Praskanma Sinha Roy and Dr. Ajay Gudavate will then come in that order. The discussants will get 15 to 18 minutes for their representation. After which Professor Bhattacharya will respond. In the second session, we open it for audience and take it further. So now I will request Professor Bhattacharya to come and start his
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, JNU Academy for holding this discussion. When Supreme came and asked me to be part of it, I was a little hesitant because, I mean, normally what happens is that you make a presentation and afterwards it gets published. In this case, this is a discussion on something that one has published, and that too is not a book, it's just a paper. So I was very, very hesitant to begin with, but still, given your enthusiasm and the kind of, sort of inspirations that I get from my students, I thought that it's only fitting that I discuss a few things in this particular essay, which many of you probably have read, some of you read, some of you do. Maybe this discussion will be somewhat interesting for you. You see, I mean, one of the advantages of teaching in JNU, and this I told in the class before as well, and for that matter, this is for the first time I'm discussing any line pieces in the class. So, is that here you get students from all different parts of the country. As a result, what happens is that you are, as students, and coming from regions, you are the experts from those regions. Right? And I mean, teaching Indian politics in JNU itself is such a rewarding experience because of that. Because I mean, you have much more expertise, experience, and knowledge about the local politics that you carry with you when you come to JNU, and we can have free-floating discussion in the class, debates, and arguments, etc., which actually enriches all of us. Now, when I first came to JNU, I realized that I was struck by the Delhi centricity of some intellectuals, in the sense that those who stayed in Delhi and never went out of Delhi, and had very little exposure to vernacular literature. I mean, many of them were making huge comments about Indian politics. Now, it struck me, and I thought that, well, can you really understand Indian politics without understanding the regions? And in the recent times, two very important contributions have come, one from Sudipto Kaviraj and another from Papi Chatterjee, which many of you might have seen. One is where Kaviraj writes about taking regions theoretically, seriously, and Chatterjee's idea of relativist understanding of Indian nationalism. You get a really interesting sense of how regions and locality matters in our understanding of Indian politics and why it should matter. And why, regional languages, vernaculars, they are so important. These linguistic groups are so important in the understanding of Indian politics. Because the basic argument is this, that you can have a formalistic institutional understanding of Indian politics from the top. But if you have to have a deeper understanding of Indian society and democracy and the sociological processes therein, you cannot possibly have it without a sense of the cultural history of the place. And this cultural history of the regions and places cannot be accessed without a sense of this groups, these linguistic and ethnic groups, which constitute the humongous entity called Indian nation. So, as a researcher, it's very important for us to do fieldwork because without fieldwork, you don't get a sense of what's happening at the ground level. And fieldwork can be of a different kind. You can do archival work, that is also called fieldwork. You can go to different areas and do ethnographic work. You can do other sorts of fieldwork, etc., which we discuss in the research methodology classes. But the point is to look at democracy from ground level. So basically, uh, whereas an institutional focus from the top is possible at a really panoramic level, the institutional focus from the top can only be partial unless you have a view from the deeper cultural sense of democracy from the bottom. And that is one of the reasons why, I find it very interesting to do fieldwork. And this last 1 year of my sabbatical, 6 months of that period, I could spend doing my own fieldwork after a long, long time. And without fieldwork, it's very difficult for me to really write something substantial or meaningful. And this is a larger book project that I'm thinking of. And this is maybe the preliminary framing of that project. Now, you notice that this paper doesn't have much of ethnography. This doesn't have ethnographic detail at all. This doesn't have textual detail of different leaders, etc., etc. I'm now reading another prolific writer, more prolific than Ajay, who is Mamata Banerjee. She has about 14 or 15 books, and of the recent publications, I doubt whether she gets the time to write, and whether there are others who are, taking notes and writing for her. I don't know that, but the language certainly has changed. I'm trying to track the language, but she has enormous bit of writing in Bengali language and also in English. So you see, those are the things which are my interviews are missing in this. My larger reading of the texts of different practitioners of politics, they are missing in it. This is more a kind of a general framework through which we can actually make a sense of present Bengal politics. And as it so happens that when you make an intimate understanding of regional politics, it doesn't remain confined to the region. It's not impossible that somebody might find some part of it, replicable or applicable in other understanding other regions of the country and so on. I wouldn't be surprised about that, especially the category which has been mentioned right now, crony capitalism of non-corporate kind. I thought that nobody really thought about it. I didn't come across this in any of the texts, although you know that this has a history in the sense that it couldn't have arrived without Kalyan Sandal's research, it couldn't have arrived without rendition of Kalyan Sandal's research in Pakicharaj's essays and so on and so forth. But that is probably what encapsulates the sense in which Bengal politics veers in today's India. In the sense that there is a kind of a condensation, a fusion of power and profit in the hands of certain functionaries who govern the localities and who use the brand of party and brand of Mamata in order to have a complete dominance, territorial dominance in various neighborhoods. And this territorial dominance is almost exclusive, almost monopolistic, because without this, you cannot continue to have the kind of transactions which take place here. And these transactions are partly legal, mostly illegal. In the sense that, for instance, even now, day before yesterday, Trinamool MPs, MLAs, and Panchayat functionaries, they held a demonstration in Rajpath and Jantar Mantar, demanding the due amount, which is the unpaid amount for Narega and other. And I mean, of course, I mean, this is something that the center should release. There's no doubt about it, because after all, those people who walked in Narega, they are the sufferers in the end. But on the other hand, it's not uncommon for any researcher or journalist in Bengal to find that much of this Narega money has been misused, or Awas Yojana money has been misused. In the sense, it has gone in wrong hands. It has been, I mean, the job cards are with people who are not supposed to have those job cards with them. In some places, a lot of work has been shown as have been done, but the work was not done by human labor. Machines were used and so on and so forth. So I mean, all sorts of practices which we usually call corruption, that takes place. But at the same time, that corruption has both sides. In the sense that where you have such a skewed distribution of resources, corruption can also be a source of livelihood for many. And I mean, you cannot actually have a very mono sort of causal understanding of corruption, and you cannot have you cannot brand corruption as something which is unacceptable, which is evil, which is something that we have to get completely rid of, and that is why I have a description of some questions which this geographer Kuntala she raised about, I mean, for instance, when you talk about mining, and you see that pilferages are taking place because of the involvement of the locals in illegal mining, you can raise questions as though, whose property is this? After all, this is not a property which belongs to the corporate houses. Or, I mean, if it is a public property, it should remain with the public in some way. If the public property is being now diverted to corporate houses, then how come that if the locals do it in their own way, it is considered as corruption, but it is not considered as corruption when undue advantages are given to huge corporations by the state. And so these are the questions which are puzzling, which don't have any sort of clear answer, so to say. And therefore, corruption can also be a way of life and can be part of politics. It is not necessarily something which can be painted in terms of black and white as something which is reprehensible and so on and so forth. So it has both sides. It has both sides, and that's the reason why, despite being corrupt, the political functionaries at the ground level can still, continue to have a degree of acceptance and hegemony, and people turn to them for various sorts of reasons, including you know, get help for their children's education, for getting admission in certain things, and so on and so forth. So this continues. This is a kind of a transaction which continues, which is partly moral, partly immoral, ethical, unethical, but you cannot make, this is very fuzzy area, and you cannot make a clear distinction between what is acceptable and what is not in terms of democracy from that ground level. And this messy politics is what I consider is the bread and butter of many people who are interested in understanding ground level politics, and especially not in the context of just in the context of Bengal, but in other parts of the country as well. Now, in Bengal, the other question, apart from democracy, which has been raised here, is about the party. Why is party so important? I tried to answer this in some way in the essay, but it is not adequate in the sense that in Bengal, party played a critical role in, especially in post-independent Bengal, for refugee settlement and for land reforms. These are the two important areas in which party intervention was tremendously important. Now, the party was not directly involved in refugee settlements. You had other organizations which were affiliated to the party. But as regards land reforms, the left party, especially the CPIM, that was critical in implementing land reforms because it required the distribution of property at the ground level, where you had opposition from the landed gentry as well as sections of the bureaucracy. And this could not have been done without the intervention of the party. And in other works and in some earlier work, I tried to show that in doing this, the party needed a certain kind of cultural capital because you need to know the nuances of governance. Otherwise, you cannot you cannot carry out certain legislative functions at the ground level. So, in order to get a sense of how the government runs, you need cultural capital, and the people who offered this cultural capital for the party at that time were the local school teachers, mainly primary school teachers. And invariably, wherever you go, you come across local school teachers who would be left-wing leader of the party and had would have some degree of respect, recognition in the area. People would come to them. They will become almost autonomous entities. I mean, side by side the panchayat, side by side the other party organizations, and so on. Now, eventually, this collapsed. It collapsed because of various reasons, including the fact that the salary of the teachers went up because of their unionized activities. And as your salary goes up, your lifestyle goes up, and your distance with the rest of the community, that also creates a huge problem, and so on. So you fail to retain the kind of integrity that you had earlier and the kind of intimacy you had with the constituency that you were supporting. As a result, all different kinds of cleavages entered in that sphere, and the school teachers lost the kind of credibility they had earlier. And at the same time, this was also the period in the post-land reforms period. You had this agricultural surplus being invested in various kinds of informal enterprises. Unlike many states in the south, like Andhra, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, or for that matter, Karnataka, you didn't have large-scale agrarian surplus, which then went into the funding of corporate enterprises. I mean, much of it went to IT and other kind of entrepreneurships. But here it was mostly informal and small-scale kind of enterprises, for which Bengal is second in terms of number only to Uttar Pradesh. And these are people, who had the new elite, you might say, who were emerging from the ground. They didn't have any particular political affiliation to stick to. And they made use of the left parties as long as the left parties were in power. The moment the left parties lost the legitimacy after the fiasco in Singur, Nandigram, etc., many of you know that, they quickly switched their allegiance to other political parties, mainly the Trinamool Congress, and now they kind of make a switch between Trinamool and BJP and so on. So this is the kind of a fabric of the political change that we were witnessing. But in between, something very different happened, that is the entry of the BJP. The BJP did not have any place in Bengal, and BJP rose, had a meteoric rise in Bengal in the 2019 and post-2019 election. So this required to be explained, and there are various explanations. And my ground level understanding is that people who voted for the left started voting for BJP. Many of them did it because they wanted to save their skin. They wanted to save their skin from the ruling party in the state. Because especially if you look at 2018 Panchayat election in the state, this was one of the most violent elections, and this was the Trinamool had a record number of unelected representatives where nobody could contest. So it was in such a situation that and protection, security, these are very important things, especially where you don't have institutional protection or institutional security from the police, etc. You need people around you to protect you, and party plays a huge role in that. can play the role. And of course, the BJP at the center with all its agencies and so on was in a much better position to offer that kind of protection to the people at the ground level, and people switched. And I wouldn't say that ideology was not involved here. Of course, ideology was also involved. In the sense, this I tried to show that one of the maneuverings which Mamata did after she came to power, because she didn't have the kind of a party that CPM was, which was highly organized, regimented, hierarchical, etc., etc. Mamata didn't have such a party, and Mamata's party was much more chaotic, much more loosely bound, and so on and so forth. Where she was the most important persona, and therefore what she wanted to do was to extend her affiliation to the existing community organizations, and in doing so, she actually, and mind you, Mamata was part of NDA when Gujarat program happened. And therefore, in order to get support from the Muslims in Bengal, which constitutes 30% of the population, and which were increasingly sort of getting disillusioned with the left, especially after the publication of Sachar Committee report, where it was found that Muslim representation was not really as much, and immediately after the publication of the report and when this disenchantment was happening among the Muslims, the left-wing government tried to implement the Rangnath Commission report, where reservation was given to the OBCs among Muslims and so on. So they tried, but it was too late, and it was not very convincing. So the Muslims were veering away from it. And as it happened, it was time for Mamata to show her gestures to the community, and which is again not a block. I mean, there are different sections, and it's a very heterogeneous kind of group of people. But Mamata tried her best through the religious leaders of Muslim organization to extend her affiliation to this community. And she succeeded. But in order to do so, she created a public image which, made BJP's allegation of her Muslim appeasement appear as true. It doesn't matter whether Muslims actually benefited from her policies, because they didn't. But the very charge of Muslim appeasement stuck because of the gestural and symbolic politics that she was doing for a very long time in order to get support of this particular community. Now, as a result, what happened that there was a kind of a shift, partly ideological, but mostly, I think, existential shift from the left to BJP among the voters. And as a result, the left doesn't have any representative in the Legislative Assembly right now or in Parliament from Bengal. I mean, this is just unimaginable if you compare it with what happened in 2006, with the last election where the left actually swept the state. So all this taken together created a situation in which what I call this franchisee politics, that is a model of the franchisee run by the local leaders using Mamata and the party as a brand to carry out their transaction and dominance at the territorial level in different parts of the state. This is something which has evolved. And it has evolved within the party society where Mamata doesn't have such a strong party as the left has. So this is a kind of a situation that I see. But at the same time, the silver lining is this, that in franchisee politics, you have not just conflict, which creates and procreates violence, but you also need collaboration. Collaboration between people, because without collaboration across different ethnic and religious groups, you cannot run the non-corporate economy. The non-corporate economy, by its very definition, it relies on a certain degree of cooperation and collaboration on the part of people, irrespective of their cultural, religious location. And with 30% population as Muslims and which has a contiguous presence in Bengal, any kind of communal conflict, and communal conflict had been sort of had taken place very frequently with the advent of BJP, but there's a limit to which it can happen because people cannot afford to have communal conflict which can ruin their own existence as well as their own survival, their economy, their livelihood. So, in this kind of franchising model, in this kind of transactional politics, you need a certain collaborative mechanism between people across religious divides where wedge politics does not work. And I think that this is kind of a structural possibility, apart from other cultural, kind of sort of moorings which I mentioned in the article. This is a kind of a structural deterrence for for wedge politics to polarize Bengal socially within its electoral map of polarization. So, and that we are seeing, for instance, after the 2021 election, where the Hindu votes veered in one direction for BJP, and a bulk of Muslim votes, 75% of the Muslims voted for Mamata Banerjee, and that was out of sheer sense of survival after CAA and NRC. You know, what is now happening is that much of these votes, both from the so-called Hindu, so-called Muslim, they are now returning to the left and the Congress. All the by-elections which have taken place, they showed that the margins are changing. The municipal elections, they show that the margins are changing. Apart from the fact that in North Bengal recently there was an election where the BJP has done much better, but because again, there the BJP is playing the card of the community of the Rajvanshis in a very dangerous manner, where they are a section of the Rajvanshis who are demanding the partition of Bengal between north and south, and local leaders of the BJP have given voice to that call. So this is a very special case. This is a very distinctive case. But taking that out, in all other elections, the trends are showing a different kind of direction from the 2021 elections. And I'm not surprised if this trend continues, given the kind of structural constraints that the BJP might have in it. So this is the overall, structure of the argument, but I'm sure that there are other nuances which can be discussed. But with this, I give the floor to my friends Ajay and Pushkar.
Thank you, JNU Academic, for providing me this opportunity to discuss my supervisor's paper. Uh, so many points have already been raised, uh, which is the methodological aspect of this paper, and the, as Professor Bhattacharya has explained, the main key arguments of the paper. And what I'll do is, for those who have not read the paper, I'll just briefly talk about the key points, takeaways of the arguments of the paper, and then make a few comments, observations, which I have, along with a few questions. So, first, something which we already discussed is that in West Bengal's political field, Bhattacharya writes that one belongs to the party, and he starts with the example of panchayat elections where rampant violence happened, and he provokes the author to ask that what makes someone, a grassroots party worker, literally die for the party. So from there he says that in West Bengal the peculiarity is that party identity is somewhat more stronger over the years. It has been be stronger than other ascriptive identities of religion, caste, and other similar identities. So this is a peculiarity of West Bengal, which is the result of the party society framework which evolved during the left front, where party became the chief mediator in every aspect of social life, from economic to familial. Every dispute was settled by the party at the grassroots, which is a peculiarity of West Bengal's politics, in the rural areas. But he says that TMC has changed it all. And what has changed? First, there is a replacement of a disciplined, structured party form to a single charismatic leader, which is Mamata Banerjee. And there is no clear hierarchy of authority or structure in the TMC, and which makes the TMC and the leader depend on community leaders or a new emerging elite. And this has given rise to what he calls franchise mode of politics. And although he says that there are sediments of the party society, and in note 2 he says that even if now we see that there is rampant examples of defection, people changing parties, one party to other, even leaders and workers, it presents a paradox that then what happens to the sense of belonging? So there he says that it's still there is a sense of belonging, because it's important that a partisan, even after shifting loyalty from one party to another, continue to be a partisan. The need for alignment with the party remains strong. Now, what is the franchisee mode of politics as a conceptual tool? First, what Mamata Banerjee's TMC has changed, and this shift, what he is talking about, is that one is that outsourcing social control to community leaders, and I'll come to this later again, and local control to grassroots party bosses, which is a new class of entrepreneurs. Second, he says that the brand of the party and the charisma of the leader is used by these local bosses to reap electoral benefits as well as legal and illegal business profits in exchange of support to the Mamata Banerjee's leadership. Third, there are dangers of this franchising mode of politics conceptually. The first is that it can lead to uh, unimpaired accumulative practices by these local bosses. And this can deplete the party's popularity at the grassroots, and in which case the leader herself or himself should come and for damage control. And this has happened in case of West Bengal, where Mamata Banerjee, when the corruption charges came, she came and said that I am the candidate from all whom I propose. Next is that what is important in this franchising mode of politics is the territory or territorial constituency is very important. And control over territory by these local bosses is so important that this arrangement cannot be disturbed. And in case any threat is there to these structure existing new form of control over territory by in this franchising mode of politics, that must be dealt with strongly and with violence if needed. Next, that franchising mode of politics has a transactional character, which Bhattacharya argues limits the agenda of ethno-vegetarian politics to mobilize voters along ascriptive identities. So, in a franchising mode of politics, these are the key highlights of this emerging uh, changing situation in West Bengal. And there are four ramifications which Bhattacharya talks about in four intersecting areas. One is governmental populism, the second entrepreneurial party, third community outreach, and four polarization limits. I'll not go into the details, but I'll make a few observations based on the argument presented. First, what we see in this paper is the use of a market term to understand politics and describe political change, and which makes us provokes one to think about the larger changes in the Indian political landscape. First is that what we see that the idea of brand party and this market term, this usage And this branding is not something which came with Mamata Banerjee, in my opinion, in West Bengal. If following works, other observers who worked on the shift in the left's political position, particularly in its uh, final years under the chief ministership of Buddhadev Bhattacharya. Uh, Observer of West Bengal politics will remember that there was a very popular term called brand Buddha, which basically gained currency in the state to reincarnate the left during its last years, and a particular mode of development which is drawing private investments in infrastructure, private investment in agro-based industries, and there was an administrative developing. Those were promoted in the initial years. And from Professor Bhattacharya's earlier work, we know that the left became, and he mentions in there, that a series of blunders by the left such as this led to the collapse. So land acquisition. So the mainstream left became an apologist for corporate capital, which led to its decline. So then, in this sense, the brand party that TMC now represents, and the usage of a market analogy is something where there is some kind of a continuity from the late left front years. Second is that the Bhattacharya says that he is interested in the peculiar character of Mahmud's governmental populism. Here, one again is provoked to think that what is the peculiarity of Mamata? Because managing population groups, which also calls as targeted munificence and rolling out schemes in the norm, is perhaps the norm of Indian politics today to address the issues, albeit partly the issues of social protection and welfare. If we see other political parties, for example, INC's Nyay program, BJP's free election and DBT initiatives, or pension for housewives given by the left front in Kerala, are similar welfare schemes, and where there is the way governmental populism has been conceptualized in the paper is that there is a nobody wants to be associated with the as with the profit making big corporations. There is always a pro image of the leader, where the leader manages through welfare schemes in the informal space to conceal the larger aspect of big capital controlling the larger questions of economic political economy. So that's so. I would a more in-depth analysis of the peculiarity of Mahmuta's populism, and how is it different from other examples from other Indian states is something which I would like to know more about. And third is that what are the antecedents, are there any antecedents or parallels of this franchising mode of politics in India or outside India? And here also welfare schemes, the way welfare schemes act or function. In one aspect that the paper mentions is that it is this targeted munificence. Welfare schemes packaged a gift from the leader. This often makes the voters uh, calm, callous, or collusive on the voting day. This, I think, can this provokes me to ask that are we then undermining the intelligence of the Indian electorate? So that's one question I have. Now, this new entrepreneurial class, Bhattacharya has elucidated that what are the main features of this emerging class. That this one shift is that from the upper caste cultural elite, what we see is the backward class leadership emerging at the grassroots level, who crave for both recognition and defiance. So, which is not exactly the prologue of the erstwhile years, the controlling elite. So, there is a shift. It's corrupt and also competitive. And there is, of course, what we have been discussing, that there is what we see, there is a cronyism of the non corporate kind emerging. Now, so is it a shift in many ways, or is it a culmination of the left's politics? Because in Bhattacharya's earlier 2009 paper in EPW of Control and Factions, I remember his ethnographic detail where one of the families, doctors, lamenting about the left front reform, and I quote the local leader said, democracy had made things upside down. The lower castes are the rulers now, and the middle classes their agents. Unquote. So it provokes us to ask that isn't it the culmination of a democratic change in rural party leadership that began under the left frontiers through its structural reforms, both on the land question as well as in the local governments. And what is the future of the Bhadralok given this change? Third, community outreach. What we see is that that there is a crisis in my own work also, drawing from Professor Bhattacharya's work. I see, and he anticipated in one of his early papers, that after the left front came up with its pro-industrialization, pro-private capital policies, it became an appeal for corporate capital, and which led to the crisis of the party society and the possibilities at that point of time where that there will be a shift towards identitarian politics of the community, which he rightly anticipated. And the crisis, what it did, in my opinion, or what I saw during my fieldwork, is that there was a rise of community leaders. In my research, I have shown it through the organizational politics of the Motua Mahasabha. And what the community organization or the leadership did, it replaced the role of the party in the at the local level, at the rural level. So earlier, for example, if an arbitrary arrest or a random arrest was made, the person who would assist that detained fellow would be the party, local party worker. Now, for example, in my field where I've said, say a refugee, someone is arrested and on the pretext of being an illegal migrant, the first point of contact becomes Motua Mahasabha or the community. And the community leaders goes to the police station, negotiate with the police, and in case of they try to find a solution to mitigate the issue. So this is a major shift that has happened in the, and this is not peculiar to TMC. This is a something which is true for the left front in West Bengal today as well. For example, the ISF Left Front Alliance, the fact that left has to go to Furfura Sharif and rope in religious leader of the organization, make an electoral pact, and then fight elections is definitely an effort on part of the left to reach out to communities. So this is not peculiar to TMC in contemporary West Bengal. I give one more example. For instance, in 2010, the left front, it was almost clear that it's going to lose the elections because of after Shimun Nodigra movement. But what it did is in 2008, it instituted an award called the Horichand Guruchand Purushkar. The award was instituted in the name of Harichand Guruchand, the Motua preceptors, the leaders. And the award was given to the then head of the organization of Motua Mahasangha, Kopil Krishna. Now, this is something, this outreach was started from the left front years, the last years of the left front, and it is true not only for the TMC, but true for other mainstream political parties, including the left. BJP, of course, is doing it right now. And this also says that while is community outreach needed, does that mean that the party identity is getting diluted and abstractive identities are getting more prominent in the political landscape of West Bengal? Finally, Bhattacharya concludes that BJP, there is a very limited chance of BJP becoming a polar figure in West Bengal politics anytime soon. But what I understand is that BJP in 2000, of course, the BJP has there is a shift in voting behavior in by-election. But by-elections, as we know, are a particular form, a type of election where there is a particular way of voting. And but if we take the general elections to the state assembly, then BJP currently, at least in the last election 2021, it had 37.97% vote. And given its money power, because of the electoral bond, its use of central agencies, the weakening party society framework, increased prominence of aspective identities. It seems like BJP is the polar figure in West Bengal politics today. So I would like to hear more on this. And finally, to conclude, uh, in contemporary West Bengal, we have an impression that we see that the paper starts with violence, and the question that what makes one die for the party. But in contemporary, two other forms of violence, which and what Professor Bhattacharya realized that what separates the violence or over controlling territory in case of say this new emerging elite. Uh, and what differentiates this emerging form of violence from the erstwhile form of violence under the left front was um, that the left represented either class violence, which was either class violence, which was represented through the peasant movements in the late colonial or the post-colonial period, or there was violence used by the local party leaders to execute pro-poor laws. But there were other forms of violence which happened from the late colonial period till the left front regime, which perhaps is the memory of those violence actually is a very instrumental in shaping voting behavior or party affiliations or political choices of the people in West Bengal. Two forms of violence which I came across repeatedly in the vernacular literature of Nomoshudur refugees and the Motuas, and also in political campaigns and speeches of leaders. One is the partition violence, which is frequently used by BJP to polarize voters, and it's good and so on. And second is a violence which was done by the left, which is the Morichapi violence, which has been which has been used by many Dalit activists to point out the anti-refugee stance of the left after it came to power. So these are few observations that I have on the paper, but these are my initial thoughts. The paper definitely elucidates the messy world of politics and provokes us to think more about not only the important about party, society, its changing form of control in a region, or that is West Bengal. Thank you.
So let me also begin by thanking JNU Academic for this repeated opportunity to come back before you. And I should also mention here that you said you did PhD. We were the first batch that Zweipan taught. You remember, Zweipan might not remember because I was a very bad and irregular student. Zweipan had given me B minus. I was looking to settle my scores. I thought this is the opportunity I have. Joking, he had given me reasonably good grade. Okay, so this, as you all read, this is a very formidable paper which really covers a lot of ground, which gives us really a panoramic view of Bengal politics and then what awaits India. As we always say, what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. I think in this case, this is absolutely right. That the kind of nature of political violence that Zlatan traces here, from a centralized kind of a party society to a more decentered kind of outsourcing that happens. So all those details, I think, Bapan himself summarized, and then co-panelists, I think you have raised, I'm sorry, your name is very difficult. I'm unable to remember.
Kanwa.
Kanwa. I will still say he. This is like a Swedish name, your name. So, so what I will do, since the details are all before you, is express certain concerns about the paper and a primary concern that the paper actually throws light in a very different direction from the way we understand post-colonial approach to Indian politics. What we broadly refer to as the post-colonial approach to Indian politics, which includes Rudolph, to Chatterjee, to Dipesh, to all others who have been writing in that mode. Though my lament is that Verpan does not push his case any further. He only makes passing remarks. Uh, the paper remains, in a sense, more empirical in terms of great amount of details. But I feel that there is lot amount of theoretical or conceptual issues that one can pull out. So I'm going to extrapolate from his narrative, and then I would be very interested to know whether Verpan would agree to that kind of conceptualization that that paper might lend itself to. So I'll raise about three issues. One, of course, I think you have raised this entire issue of governmental populism, and we have been discussing populism at least for last 10 years, and rightly so you refer to certain kind of a regional variation to populism in the West Bengal context. So my first conceptual question really would be in terms of the equation between populism and Chatterjee's concept of political society. I think that's a concept that you somehow drop, though there are some oblique references to it through via Kalyan Sanyal, but you don't make a direct reference. But I think there are certain points that which you make, which seem in a very direct tension and conflict with the formulation of political society. Unless things have changed in a dramatic fashion, because I think political society came in 2004, and then it's been about 20 years now. So one would be that kind of an argument you can take in terms of time scale. But in otherwise, I mean that mode of theorization of Partha Chatterjee, I think is not 2004, but it draws from subaltern studies, and it's a very long during kind of a sustained framework of analyzing Indian politics. So you make you question in your section that about the cooperative spirit, the emphasis that is laid on cooperative spirit, and which I think lends itself to things like what Chatterjee himself refers to creative power of community. And your emphasis is in terms of growing social fragmentation that has taken place, not only from parties, centrality of party to community in decentralization, but intra-community conflicts also. You show kinds of range of conflicts, and therefore a condition where political violence has become a kind of a structural condition in Bengal. Which goes with my own paper we did. I co-authored, Chatterjee, we edited a volume, making Gazipalli a polluted village, which is precisely the point we make, that we don't find that kind of subaltern communitarian kind of an the approach that Chatterjee takes in terms of political society being the new form of a community, where people come from different things, but they strike a common, which almost like Laclau's idea of equivalence and community taking that shape, and where we argued that that cannot be possible because the structural context of political economy simply does not lend itself to that kind of cooperation. So Chatterjee's looks like more of an anomalous, selective picking of something rather than something that we can use as a sustained framework to analyze Indian politics. So instead, Indian politics is actually flowing in terms of rampant social fragmentation, rise of sectarianism, rise of inter-subaltern conflicts, and that overlaps with partly the kind of justification that Weapon also made today in terms of legitimizing corruption as some kind of a questioning of the structural context of why only corporates, why not us? That kind of rendering somewhere is also legitimizing uh, uh, growth of this kind of an intra-subaltern context. So for my first question really would be that I think social fragmentation and intra-subaltern conflict is right at the heart of your paper, which takes us completely in a different direction from post-colonialism, particularly Chatterjee's writing, but much more from subalterns onwards. That therefore this can be extended in terms of this deployment of community as an empty category in much of post-colonialism. That the way they deploy the idea of a community, it's actually both pre-sociological and also ahistorical. That we don't actually get that subalternity is, in one sense, if you read them, is a very prefigurative condition that that is independent of the subject positions, and which comes across in subaltern studies. That they have a sense of subalternity, and then social positions are kind of read into rather than emerging from social conditions themselves. Therefore, that category becomes so elastic that Pathuda in a personal conversation in Kolkata said that even Mamta Banerjee is a subaltern because of non-English speaking persona in terms of it's a discomforting, but I mean, it could be a provocative question, but nevertheless, what kind of a formulation? It seems to be more of an ethical formulation rather than a political formulation, which also I think misses the question of power dynamics within community. Much of the post-colonial, which I think comes across very clearly in your writing, that there are power dynamics that, that are internal to community. So that would be my question, which also takes us, very interestingly, that this social fragmentation, process of social fragmentation in Chatterjee's writing finally ends up to the point of justifying the case of Malda women. I don't know if you're that Pathuda gives this, his very famous example, even in his rejoinder to my edited volume, he gives this example of a single old woman in Malda who kind of sits before the block office, then goes to the panchayat, and then keeps getting, either some welfare scheme or a blanket or some dole. Uh, and Chatterjee raises this very pertinent question. Chatterjee is always the elephant in the room. We have to get around his questions because he continuously disturbs you, kind of haunts you. Even when I'm sleeping, sometimes I think of Chatterjee's question. What is this he is raising? And then he says that this is this woman a political subject? And he says that I find it unconscionable to kind of blame this woman as not being a political subject. Yeah, so so there is, at one level he's trying to attribute a certain agentive role to this Malda women, but from another frame it almost looks close to rational choice. What you do, what works on the ground. So there is a sense of pragmatism. There is a sense of that justification of that transactional mode in subaltern politics, but then we are also critical of transactional politics when it comes to structural analysis. So there is this kind of, partly that I found in Dwarpayan's analysis also, that it seems to be moving on two legs. That on one hand, at a descriptive level, at a structural level, you critique transactional politics, but in terms of subaltern everyday interaction, you seem to think that that kind of opens up alternatives for subaltern agency. So this question, the kind of question that Chatterjee is raising, that is this women in Malda a political subject? This is a very provocative question, but this is essentially a very ethical question that is raising. And therefore the question is, how do we frame question of subaltern agency in a way without condemning the subaltern? So that's the continuous question, I think, at the heart of Subaltern Studies project, but more so in his recent formulations on political society, which then get reflected partly, I think Dwarpayan does kind of both. Which also kind of takes me to the book that Dr. refers to in his work, Partwada's book on populism, I Am the People, where I was completely taken aback by his reading of populism. Then you are suddenly struck by this that populism, he reads it as a continuation of passive revolution, and populism essentially as a political management of capital and processes of accumulation. Those are his broad formulation of how he reads the populist phenomena. Therefore, he argues that populism is a phenomena where you maintain subaltern through welfare policies, and then you allow accumulation to grow back. I think you also referred to that in your initial remarks in terms of pro-taxation of corporates and welfareism in Mamta's model also. This also then raises an n number of interesting kind of questions of how do you frame folk politics, popular politics, which has been at the heart of post-colonial framework, that they kind of foreground everything in terms of popular politics, in terms of folk politics. Uh, the basic understanding we had about populism was that populism foregrounded that kind of extra-institutional mobilization, that kind of folkish character to politics. Uh, is there a tension between these two formulations? That to look at populism as something as a top-down phenomenon, and then to talk about political society essentially in terms registers of popular politics. This is a confusion that might be there in the kind of shift that we are reading from party society to franchisee politics. That was something top down, that was centralized, but here in Mamta Banerjee's we kind of seem to see a decentered thing. So my larger question really is that are we missing this structure and the way it works itself? That these what do these shifts really mean in terms of? Therefore, I think that tension I see in Chatterjee's work, that he seems to be doing both. That he makes a structural reading of populism as something that allows accumulation process, that essentially is a continuation of passive revolution when you read it from a structural point of view. But political society, which is itself a form of populism, which is itself a form of passive revolution, which is itself a form of the accumulative process in the informal sector, you read popular politics there. You read expansion of subaltern agency. How can we do both? This has been my long-standing confusion, which I wanted to kind of settle it with Chatterjee himself. When I was last in Kolkata, I wrote to him saying that I want to drop by, but the same day he was presenting in the center his new book on Ambedkar. We couldn't meet up, but this is one question I have, which kind of gets reproduced in Dwaipan's work, which has a larger theoretical in terms of philosophical question in terms of politics of difference. This entire post-structural context, obviously post-colonialism draws a lot from post-structural formulation. That simply proliferation of differences, decentering, decentralization, kind of autonomy of movement does not necessarily mean that they move outside the systemic logic. That the systemic logic can co-opt these differences. So from Deleuze to Martha, Maris Young, this entire gamut of writings on politics of difference. The one problem that we often have, I think Zizek has a very good piece on this when he comments on multiculturalism, is that they all work, or at least the systemic logic kind of catches up with these differences, that they are not outside. I think that's where you also make this point. That's why, my lament that why did you not develop that? This is not non-capital use. Precisely the point that I'm making, that these are not outside the capital. The logic of the capital also works. Through fragmentation, I think political violence is also a manifestation of that accumulative process. It's an outcome of that. To read it then as kind of a non-political, outside, in terms of need economy and subsistence, also looks, fairly contradictory. Which also then goes to, the base question of class, interest. So I'll not get into all of that. And it also goes into this, somewhat, I would say, very discomforting formulation that Chatterjee makes at the end of his politics of govern, that at this micro paralegalities, he says, the squatter communities occupying public land, which is like a paralegal. He says gradually they have the potential to move up to questioning the power of property relations and private property. So this is again, I mean, this kind of a formulation to read that kind of a radical instance that micro transactional paralegal survival strategies can have this kind of a radical potential. It looks more of an ethical reading. One can agree with Chatterjee's concern that it's an ethical reading of dignifying subaltern in his space, but it has a very ominous possibility of valorizing the subaltern condition. But if you begin to read such kind of radical potentialities in terms of paralegal existence as being disruptive in terms of the structural logic of private property, I think this is fairly Bhadralokful. That breakdown of Bhadralok would mean this, that the logic of reading from a distance, that such, perhaps he was drawing it from Melucci and Gramsci's understanding of molecular change. I think Italy had a very different context of being very provincial and regional, so on and so forth. But even post-globalization, given the grip of corporate capital and global capital, can we afford to kind of read that kind of micro acts in terms of having potentiality of questioning private property and global capital, so on and so forth. Okay, my second point quickly. How much time do you have? 4 minutes. Okay, I have to rush. My second point really is, another intriguing point that you make in terms of I think even in your, I went back and read your piece on party society. I think the one running theme that really comes across is this, that party in Bengal manages to generate the strongest sense of belonging, which in a sense you seem to argue, which can be more intense than one's identity with social and religious. Now, this is also, I think, a formulation that really very strongly runs in the face of much of post-colonial emphasis on culture, religion, on ascriptive identities. This was fascinating to read, especially coming from Bengal. That Bengal was one which foregrounded so much in terms of ascriptive identities, in terms of culture, in terms of religion, and in terms of the ability of the idea of the community in Bengal to rupture the idea of the political as a modern category. You almost turn it on its head when you say that parties actually gives a sense of belonging much stronger than religion and perhaps caste and other kind of ethnic identities, which question this whole category of modernity, of tradition. So my second large broad question would be, do you see a need to revisit that equation within post-colonial literature between the ascriptive and the political, ascriptive and association? Because if party is definitely an associational, it cannot be an ascriptive formation. But your description of party comes very, very close to being almost, it works like an ascriptive identity. By birth, you belong to a party, you have a deep sense of belonging, you raise this question that they're willing to sacrifice, so on and so forth. This really reminded me of sociologist Robert Bella's writing on civil religion, where Bella makes a very similar point in terms of how nationalism in the current context it almost works like a religion. That you have a national anthem, it's a faith-based practice, you have a belief system, you have a national flag, you have rituals that you follow. So here it actually makes this oxymoron concept, civil and religion together, and it says nationalism is the civil religion. It looks like party is the new civil religion that in the Bengal context, which then actually opens up lot more space in terms of questioning the equation between the cultural and the political, which can give us interesting clues to more contemporary formulations that we have had. I'm not going to take names in terms of how political is in Indian tradition is always contaminated by the spiritual, by the intimate, and by the personal, and by the religious. But in Japan's writing, it is actually hyper-political. Bengal is hyper-political, and it actually is, kind of swallows up religion, community. Now I feel South we are better off. We have community, religion apart from party. So coming from Bengal, I think there is an immense potential there if Japan can actually develop this argument, which kind of goes beyond the post-colonial frame, and it would take us in very, very different directions in terms of some of the post-colonial claims that in Indian tradition, community and ascriptive identities had this potential to kind of permanently have a disjuncture with modern political invasion. But instead, what we see is that community and religious identity themselves become subordinate, get subsumed under hyper-political, and that's around question of interest. So my final conclusion would be that we might have to reread this entire modernity of tradition kind of frame in the Indian context, instead of arguing that traditions have managed to kind of tweak modernity to its own benefits, and people are smart enough to kind of use traditions to kind of question the logic of accumulation, modern state technologies. What I see with the rise of uh, right-wing populism and Hindu nationalism is a kind of a nexus between modern governmental mechanisms and the hierarchies and segregation within tradition. That we have, I think, an unlikely, kind of, therefore you find that in BJP use of modern technology, corporatization, hyper, neoliberal forms with social conservatism, all that is there, sectarian and hierarchical imagination within tradition. And this, I think, completely turns us away from the conventional post-colonial kind of framing that the tradition has an internal ability to change itself, so on and so forth, and therefore it will always keep a check on modernity. Therefore, this formulation of Chatterjee of our modernity or Pandian's one step outside modernity, all of these alternative modernities. But what we are feeling with the rise of right-wing populism is this question that that nexus between tradition itself being subsumed under modern governmental technology. This nexus, I think, is eventually producing the model of governance, which might actually cut across and might go beyond BJP. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both Krishnanu and Ajay. Ajay's address to more to party
Why through you?
and I wish that he was here today. He is not traveling much these days, otherwise we could have invited him for direct talk with our students, JNU. He's unlikely to travel. And I'm not going to take the onus of responding on his behalf, but I think that some of the very interesting and important questions that Ajay and Krishnan raised, they require to be answered in, and I don't think that I will be able to adequately respond to all the questions, but I think that the provocative as they are, they demand certain responses, and because after all, this I always say in the class that our social science is a conversation. This is not something that you come as the ultimate truth or you discover the ultimate truth and you sort of flag it around and so on. It's a conversation, it's a debate which goes on. And it's a matter of shade, it's a matter of quality. Now, let me start with the end. At the end, the kind of questions are very important and fascinating questions that Ajay raised about community and ascriptive identity of the community and associational identity of the party. Associational identity of the party really takes over the ascriptive identity of the community. Then are we witnessing certain reversal of valorization of the community that we found in sections of subaltern idea of subaltern politics, in post-colonial theories, and so on and so forth. But as Ajay is very much aware that not everybody valorized community in that sense. I mean, there are ranges of different takes on community, and I think Chatterjee is particularly interesting because it's very difficult to pin him down to a specific particularistic understanding of any of these ideas because apparently he walks through binaries, but he doesn't at the same time. This is, for instance, in 2004 article as well, when he talks about community as the building block of political society. He says that these are forged communities. These are not kind of traditional communities. These are new communities which are brought in by the people. And if you take that a cue from that, a party can also behave like a community. There is no hard and fast separation between a community and association life when it comes to party. It can both be association and community. So that is the problem. That is the problem of our politics. That some of these categories, they don't work as violence. They are interspersed. And I think that this is the beauty and this is the challenge of our analysis. That how we understand and how we emphasize on certain aspects. That, I mean, for instance, take for instance another example. Political society and civil society. So, in theoretical understanding, what is the standard theoretical format? It will tell you that civil society is made of citizens and political society is made of population groups. Now, any standard commonsensical distinction between the two will tell you that in population group, people are not treated as citizens because they don't have, say, in order to be treated as citizens, you need to have rights. But these people, most cases, they don't have rights. So they are not treated as rights-bearing citizens by the establishment, whatever that is. And as a result, they can only gain acceptance or make their demands fulfilled by organizing, by creating a certain modern community of political society and make demands on ethical grounds of entitlements, right? That we deserve it. Although it is not our right, we deserve it. And therefore we make it, flash it out, we make it a case so that in democratic politics, the establishment is in a way forced to respond to our demands because that will have a magnet triggering impact in other spheres of life if our demands are not fulfilled. Simply, I mean, one good example is that, how, for instance, farmers' loans are waived. Before the elections, the government says that you don't have to pay back the loans, and this happens over and over again. Now, from the strict legal financial terms, this is bad economics. But the government does it because the government knows that the triggering effect of this would be, in a way, conducive to a possibility of re-election. So, this is how the community works within the modern format. And you can say that this is not citizenship rights, but at the same time, it happens within the modern political sense. And the distinction that we make between civil and political society at that level may not work in that modular. So they get interspersed, and that is the beauty of it. So you are absolutely right, and something that I did not push in this because I think that there is an emphasis on the cooperation part in political system, and what I was looking at was the conflictual. And I could see that the conflictual part is now being instigated because of the specific particularistic interests over certain territorial claim of this franchisee in politics. So political society can be a cradle for violence and intra-community violence or intra-political society violence. That is exactly what is happening. For instance, in this panchayat election, of those killed, largest section were from the ruling party, and they were killed by the ruling party members. So it's an intra-TMC rivalry. So this is what is happening because after all, the material interests are being challenged by rival leaders who could create an alternative franchising, and that has to be stopped. This is the kind of a format within which the panchayat election took place. And therefore, what happened is that Mamata Banerjee before the election is on record saying that, I mean, many people are opposing us at the ground level, but it doesn't matter because after election they will all come to our so basically, it demoralizes the opposition. It demoralizes the voter who is voting an opposition candidate. Because an opposition candidate would be out for grab and the opposition candidate will eventually join the ruling party because that is where the money lies. So this is what is happening. This is the ground level reality. Now, do we find any ethics in it? Well, I mean, this is not completely devoid of certain ethical concerns because it also has a distributive potential within the community, within the micro, what you call micro-parental formations. It has a distributive potential. But, I mean, you change your location, it appears as out. You change your position, it appears as crass and completely transactional without any political morality whatsoever. So, what I'm suggesting is that it's very difficult to take a singular position, a judgmental position, in understanding this kind of situation. You can make a judgment on the party as such, which is benefiting out of such ill-gotten transactions at the ground level. The top leadership, the top leadership of the party is of course making a huge amount of money as a result of. I mean, you can, the other party challenge. The minister. So, I mean, there was 54 crore in cash, which was found from his girlfriend's house. So I remember that 2 months back in a conference in Germany, when I mentioned this, so some German students, they were really aghast. So they said, I mean, they could not. I mean, Bharti Charity is what? 54 crore, 540 million rupees in cash. So we had to display. We had to say, no, it's not our fault. It's there. And then I wrote, I mean, from the conference, I sent this message to Partula. And Partula replied that tell them that even if their Partha Chatterjee has this money, it will never get caught. So, so this is the problem of understanding politics at the fuzzy, at the ground level. And your concerns are well taken care of, and I'm a little surprised that Partula would say Mamata is a suburban, because that is Ranodi Shamatha's position. I haven't heard Partula saying so, because from his formulation it doesn't fit into his formulation. It fits into Ranodi Shamatha.
Sanjeev, the south after
Okay.
Of course, after a couple of drinks.
Okay.
Possible.
No, but you see that the fun of subordinity is that I mean even Adani could be subaltern to Bezos. So I mean subordinity is one such category. You just change the context and you can ascribe it to anybody. So and I mean there are so many different other questions. Ajay, thank you so much. I will think about them and I will come to them. Pushkar, no, yes, partition violence and partition violence is one. You are absolutely right. I mean, in the Hindutva project, partition violence and rekindling of the movement of the party, that is something which is being tried over and over again. Now, but I still think that he didn't work too much. He didn't work, I mean, future will say to what extent, because BJP can make real good electoral performance in the next election, given the overall national perspective. But the point is, I'm just looking at the constraints. Because partition violence was something that happened in the other part of Bengal for the Hindus, who came from eastern Bengal to this one. And that was continuing for a very long time. unlike Punjab partition, which happened in one go, this violence continued, it festered, triggered, and then it sort of continued for decades and so on. Now, at the same time, here was a certain, I mean, the partition was a result also of the fact that a majority of the Muslims were cultivating peasants, bishop, and the Hindus were the landowners. And those people who lost their large chunk of land in the eastern Bengal, they came to this part. They somehow, despite their religious differences, belong to the same cultural community, Bangali Muslim. I mean, you don't have a Musulmani Bangla. You still have a Bangla which is Sanskritized. And this is something, I mean, you were raising question about Bengal, which has valorized community, and here we find the party. Bengal is also a state where the chief minister can tell you that we don't have caste. We have only two castes, the rich and the poor, which Prashkan also, in one of his articles, he quoted. So, I mean, this is because the caste is so invisibilized in the society. It is there, but it's not visible. It's not visible because of the enormous hegemony of the body.
Pardon the said the same that is the hegemony is so complete that it's invisible.
Yeah, the hegemony is so complete that, I mean, the process of Sanskritization in Bengal is unlike the process of Sanskritization that you find in northern India. It is not Brahminic Sanskritization, it is Bhadralok Sanskritization. So basically, in order to be part of the Bhadralok JNU, you've got to have certain cultural resources, cultural capital. Your location, your education, your diction, the way you use the language, all this matters. And therefore, if you can, I mean, I know several people who would get rid of their surnames, change their surnames in order to be part of the Bhadralok JNU. So the seductive power, the attraction of being, and this is an open in the sense it's relatively more open than caste. Because you cannot, if you are a non-Brahmin, you cannot become a Brahmin. But if you are a non-Bhadralok, your next generation can become a Bhadralok. So it is more open, and in that sense. But it is also hegemony. And the cultural hegemony, and this brings the question that Vishal was raising, that this is being challenged by the new elite, the rising new elite, and this is a result of the Marathon. Definitely, this is the result. And this is a certain kind of, and mostly the Obisis, and the Bhattas whom I quoted there, they were lamenting that the new undercastes they are emerging. And these undercastes now have the money power. And of course, they are challenging the Bhadralok ethos and Bhadralok culture. And as a result, what has happened is, and the way Mamata used the Bhadralok ethos, you can imagine, I mean, there was a time when we considered Tagore songs as belonging to a certain coterie. Mamata comes to power and makes it mandatory every traffic signal to play Tagore songs. Every bus stop play around Tagore songs. Basically, this is a defiance. This is on your face. I'm telling you that you cannot retain a certain coterie for yourself. I am making it democratic. I am making it popular. Right. So, I mean, this is something which is happening right now, and this is one of the democratic resources that Mamata has. And with the television serials, with the new cinema, with the nominating cinema artists as candidates in different popular cinema artists as candidates and so on. So this is a new politics, new cultural politics that she has introduced, which is so different from the left. Left was more enlightened, and this is more kind of master. I mean, in that sense, Mamata is supporting in that sense that she is, she puts really, I mean, she doesn't care about those enlightenment values. She offers something different, completely different, and she is, uh, I mean, absolutely nonchalant about advertising herself as a poet with the kind of poetry that she writes. I mean, that's Philista. It's childish. But she doesn't have any problem in sort of propagating it. And there are people behind her, many of them from civil society, who would be considering such poetry as great contributions to the literature. And that is transactional. They must be benefiting out of that kind of cultural backing that they're giving. So there's a churning, there's a huge churning between. And this churning is, in a way, shifting the accepted vocabulary of political and civil society, accepted vocabulary of ascriptive and associational identities, and corruption and non-corruption, etc. So, I mean, I just want to capture this messy shift which is taking place. And of course, at times, my emphasis is not correct. My emphasis is not good enough, and I accept the kind of suggestions that you make in order to push some of these arguments a little further. So, I will stop here and I will take questions.
So we will take three questions at a time. So please introduce yourself. Keep your questions crisp and Ankit, Nivas, and Shubir. Second round.
Uh,
Let's move on.
music for a program हो गया. Those who are students can ask later on.
Yeah.
Sir, you have so you have provided a detailed analysis of structural limitation of right-wing politics in Bengal, alongside the mechanism and the processes through which franchising politics works in the Mississippi. But I'm interested to understand what is the structural limitation to the franchising politics itself. Okay. And the second question is you have highlighted and significantly highlighted and citing range of data that how this franchising politics limits the state capacity, overburdening the middle classes, taxes per capita burden, so on and so forth. So do you think that this state capacity, limited state capacity, can be used further by the right wing, alongside mixing with Hindutva and law and order issues to penetrate the messy world of politics in Bengal?
Nivas.
Thank you, sir, for such a good presentation. My question has to do with your conceptualization of chronic capitalism that's related with the non-corporate kind of chronic capitalism. So, other than being crony, how do you see or do you see any other differences with the Sanyal conceptualization of made economy in reference to non-corporate capitalism? And the second part is that the model of franchisee politics, which you are talking about, has to do more with the accumulations. So how can we associate with the need economy or the informal groupings? Because their whole contention is based on subsistence and need.
Supriya and then Iman.
These are not in the form of welfare questions, but is in welfare movement. The first is, I mean, how is this different from traditional patronage politics? I mean, it seems like same parceling of the state is happening at a more regional level. How is this? And it seems like the other point that you made that your social location determines how do you see the whole structure. I mean, the same kind of thing we said about the Congress system as well. If you are a client, you would see the Congress system differently. If you're a regional patron, you would see the Congress system very differently. So how is this whole formulation different from a traditional patronage politics? That is one. The second is uh, 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 the second is with regard to crony, non-corporate crony capitalism. That's at the heart of the paper. That is something view. Uh, if I remember correctly, and that is something Pankaj also raised, that the most important aspect of theorization of non-corporate capital was that the basis of that is sustenance. Now you are saying that at the heart of that is accumulation and then political violence, annihilation, not sustenance. So why should we frame it like that? Why should we not just go out of the frame itself? Why to take Sanyal, I mean, Chatterjee and Sanyal, you say that we would not have arrived here if they would not. I'm saying, yeah, that's correct. But let us take some other frame, say Baroda Harris White's frame or other frames would frame those kinds of questions with regard to black economy and other things. So coming from the other direction. So the third question, and since you raised the issue, I mean, Ranveer Samadar, he wrote a very provocative piece in Indian Express after Mamta won in 2016. He called that what is happening in Bengal is a kind of churning where subalternization and lumpenization is coming out as a poison and nectar kind of. I mean, that's the imagery used. And the other major point, and that is something that he made that continually is making that the center of Bengal's politics has now shifted from citadels of Kolkata to bazaars of Malda. That is what he said. But the first structural limit that you pose that BJP won't enter into, I mean, that won't enter into Bengal is that, I mean, it trains its guns against intelligentsia, the Bhadralok intelligence. Here is some other saying that it has already, the TMC has already done. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, and I wish I could actually do justice to all these questions. They are somewhat related. And structural, Ankit, basic question about structural limitations of competency politics. Overburdened and the middle class. I think economy itself is a constraint because Bengal did not have industrialization like many states in the south and the west. As a result, what has happened is that these entrepreneurships that you find at the ground level is a small scale. They are sometimes related to big capitals, and most of the time they are not. It is possible. I'm told that now you can have ancillary industries. The traditional idea was that you need to have a big industry and then informal industry as ancillaries around it. But given the kind of speed of transportation and other things, you can have ancillaries elsewhere. But as you know that there's a net migration, out migration from Bengal, and therefore it doesn't create the kind of jobs that is required. And I think that is a huge structural limit to franchising. Because the distributive function of franchising politics, which is the factor responsible for its relative legitimacy below there. That itself cannot be sustained with this kind of economy. It is, it's a very small scale entrepreneurship, mostly driven, the most important area in Bengal is the government. That is the problem of the economy. And unless that is rectified, I think that this cannot be sustained, and that's a huge structural constraint which will eventually give rise to different results and different formulations. Now, crony capitalism of non-corporate gig economy, this is very different from the gig economy that Sanyal was. Sanyal was looking at gig economy, and first of all, I don't think that there is a non-capital sector in the sense that there is anything outside capital. Because capital is all-encompassing, and you cannot have a sector or a sphere which can be obtained, which can be available outside the influence of capital. So any economy that you have is inducted within this capitalist system that we have. And in capitalist system, accumulation is something that can be avoided. I mean, for instance, a primitive accumulation thing that Selvan was also talking about, I mean, this primitive accumulation doesn't necessarily take place at the large scale level of the corporations. It can also take place at the small scale. For instance, where you have this illegal mining. What is happening for the sand mine? This is also a primitive form of accumulation which is taking place. And this is an informal economy which is sustaining this primitive accumulation at the ground level. So it is simultaneously accumulative as well as distributive because it is giving jobs to people. In the local people who are getting some jobs there, and I mean that is how it sustains itself. That is how, for instance, it has got a local support system. Otherwise, who would have accepted this kind of plunder of natural resources which takes place by this small entrepreneur capital? So, accumulation does take place in the Indian economy. Some sectors profit from such accumulation, but it also has a distributive function, which results in its legitimacy and sustenance. Without that, it cannot sustain itself. Now, how is it different from patronage politics, which Supreme raised? The patron-client relationship, which we knew about, which was discussed, especially in the context of Congress system and so on. First of all, the economy is changed. It is much more market-oriented, and in market-oriented economy, you more have transactions than patronage. Because patronage requires a degree of moral stability between the players, the patron and the client. And that does happen when, for instance, the state offers something. A patronage system of, say, the new welfare system. It is definitely a patronage system of certain kind. But that is a part of the story because much of the benefits now carry through the market. And this is what this franchising politics is about because it, in a way, makes use of the local market for the stability of a certain constituency, for the maintenance of a certain constituency of constituency. So that is the kind of analytical distinction between the patronage system and this transaction that I was saying. Now, and of course, violence is part of this because the territorial integrity of this franchising is something which is cardinal. Without that territorial hold, you cannot continue to have that kind of system going. And these are, territorial sovereignty. Yeah. So territorial sovereigns have to have that sovereignty within that particular sphere, and that has to be an absolute and monopolistic. And any absolute and monopolistic has observed that it requires use of violence. It cannot be sustained. And that is another question which was raised earlier. That are people foolish? People are not foolish. People are actually making use of this format to the best of their abilities. Either in order to replace it by, in the hope of replacing it by an alternative kind of politics, or for that matter, playing along with this in order to gain in material and security terms. So,
There's another question.
I have two questions. The your categorization of BJP as an outsider in Bengal and how the political respectability that it does not have gets received from the local intelligentsia. So I would like to ask that, is it really possible to find BJP an outsider when it receives around 20% of the vote? And also we have seen that regarding how Hindutva was read earlier also, so for a large period of time it was seen that it is not, it is an urban specified political party. Now it has good inroads in rural spaces. It was seen that it has just Brahmin Mania combination, and now it has been able to bring a large chunk of Hindu communities into its fold. And so this category of outsider is something, isn't it, making things kind of not reading what's going on? Because I'm taking it also from the point that Rita Jyotish Chattopadhyay's recent book, Streets in Motion, actually talks about how latent majoritarianism is part and parcel of the post-colonial Calcutta and into some other spaces also, and how the question of communal violence was in a way taken as some sort of class conflict by left governments. And also I was reading Murtulika Banerjee, Cultivating Democracy. So there I was finding that how religiosity comes up in a religious space after a certain period of time with the change of political regime, how certain acts of agrarian, like paddy cultivation or the way you try to indulge into your festivities, altogether changes with change in the regime. So this is first question. And second, I have this: what sort of newer modes of violence that has come out with the time that now franchise politics have to face Hindutva politics. So I did not find paper was addressing this much because when you're saying that any kind of threat has to be politically and violently met out in order to keep your territorial integrity strong. So how this new form of violence is taking, what I would say, is this coming with some sort of an anxiety also from the resource allocation? Because resources are getting less and less, and more people are there asking for its share and distribution, and also the communal. Is there any sort of a communal allocation of resources that you look like pitching against which TMC has some sort of a secular phase of local this? So these are two questions.
Thank you. Let me respond. Is there any?
Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Keep your questions.
Yes, yes. I have very simple questions. Like when you are talking about this Agralot and do you really think it is only in the popular discourse also, or is it since you are doing the field and living in the field, this kind of discourse also you have looked in the everyday cultural practices of the Bengal, in the entire Bengal state. So that's my.
Okay. Thank you. Let me respond to these two and as the final questions.
These are we won't take on now.
Okay.
We are running late.
Again, very difficult questions. I mean, is the BJP an outsider, and how long it can be an outsider? Because, as you pointed out in Irreducible Universe, there is how violence was considered as class and how.
When we say that this BJP coming is a culmination of those,
Right. So, you see, well, I don't know what's going to happen to the world, but the thing is that BJP, one of the ways in which Mamata won 2021 election was by branding BJP as an outsider. She made a kind of a ethno mobilization of politics, thanks to people. Immediately before the election, there were huge hoardings with Mamata's face and with the caption saying Bangla Nije Neki Chale. Bangla wants its own Georgia. Now, it actually killed two birds with just one stone. First of all, it was the Bengali Asmita, as Gujarat made their and secondly, it was also a gender Asmita. Because, BJP was perceived as a masculine party, and I also mentioned that many of the BJP leaders, there is no BJP leader of significance in Bengal. All the BJP leaders of significance were coming from northern and western. Now, it is not difficult to see, and after so many years, 2019, the BJP made such sweeping gains in Bengal. Even now, you don't have a formidable leader from BJP. The only leader who's talked about mostly, who is a downfall from TMC, Shubhendu Adhikari, who again has a very limited kind of influence in southern Bengal, in certain areas. So how come that a party which is making such enormous electoral gain doesn't have any undisputed leadership in the state? First is. So I think there is a huge hiatus between electoral results and the cultural foundation of a particular kind of politics. So you can have electoral results of certain kind for some time, but that doesn't necessarily give you a permanent position within the cultural foundation of a particular nation. And that is the difference between electoral polarization and social polarization. BJP has achieved electoral polarization as a polar party, but it is yet to achieve social polarization on religious lines to become a polar force. So this is the distinction that one has to keep in mind. And you are right in one sense that if the Bhadrolok hegemony is successfully challenged, of which there is a possibility, then what happens we don't know. But I mean, this is again the question of everyday politics at the ground. That how is Bhadrolok perceived? I mean, for instance, there was a time when sending the child to the school was important. Now sending the child to the English medium school is important. There was a time when folk theatre was important. Jatra. Now it is Bollywood which is more important. So, the cultural fabric is changing. So we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But even now, maybe less than what it was 10 years ago, it's important to have an endorsement of the Bhadrolok. Or you need to pretend to be a Bhadrolok in order to get political advantage. For instance, this Momata's nephew, Abhishek behaves like an impeccable Bhadrolok without using the kind of language that Momata used. So, this is something which is very, very good. And on the other hand, the present crop of CPM leaders who used to be impeccable Bhadroloks earlier, they are using much more what you call metholite, which is language of the bazaar. If you listen to their speeches, they are using this language of the bazaar much more than they used before. So they are talking less about Soviet Union and imperialism and talking more in terms of in the language that you understand. So it's a journey. I don't know if the Bhadrolok ethos will be replaced by certain other ethos as the ruling ethos of politics. But as of now, it has not been replaced. And in everyday politics as well, you get to see such kinds of hegemony, even now in this. And then there was another question about the new violence, Hindu-Muslim violence, and so on. This is very, very important. Bengal had enormous political violence, both at the time of partition and afterwards, even in the 60s. Now, there were moments when violence did take place in the run-up to elections in 2021 and even around 2020, some of which I mentioned. given the high density of the population and contiguity of the communities. I mean, if you go to a village, you don't see a Muslim neighborhood as completely segregated from the They are just side by side. So, do you think that these two communities can sustain a relationship of acute enmity in a situation like that? My understanding is no. In most situations, what happens of communal violence, if you read the newspaper reports, the locals will tell you that people from outside came and created the trouble, not the locals. So there is a natural tendency on the part of these locals to live in a degree of harmony, if not equality, harmony. So that is significant. And with 30% Muslims in the population speaking the same language as the Hindus do, there is a limit to which a wedge can be created. And another thing which is not mentioned by any literature, you know, there was a time, for instance, when in West Bengal one could watch television programs from Bangladesh. Mind you, West Bengal literary production has very little intimacy with Islam. I mean, most of the post-partition literature which has been produced on this side of the border, it's about Hindu appearances. Mostly. Now you have certain Dalit literature, which is a minuscule section. People like Olrani, Dakani and others, which never found that kind of foundation in Bengali literacy until very recently. So it was very upper caste Hindu literary scheme. Even Muslim writers were writing about Hindu families. Briefly, there was a time when you watched Bangladeshi television plays. And of course, that's a different society, different culture, and different religion altogether. But you had a taste of what's happening out there. And there used to be Bangladeshi book fair in Calcutta, where you could buy Bangladeshi books. But I don't think it was very widespread. But of late, what has happened with social media, this barrier has broken. You know, I mean, now some of the Bangladeshi artists are hugely popular in West. Not just among Muslims, but also among Hindus. Like, I mean, Musharraf Karim, he's a Bangladeshi actor. And he does funny plays as well as serious plays. If you ever get a chance, there was a particular film on Netflix for some time, now it is removed. But if you get a chance, do watch it. A film called Formula Rocket. It is about this garment factory fire in Bangladesh, where Musharraf Karim plays the lead role. And so on. Now, you see that these are the kind of movements which are needed. So, Muslim society, Muslim Bengali society, that is through literary representation and cinematic representation, they are now gaining in an access into the Hindu literary public sphere. So I don't know what the results would be, but I suppose that this is something new that is happening.
I would like to thank the speakers for joining us today for this enlightening discussion on Professor Bhattacharya's article concerning the intricacies of Bengal politics. We are honored to have had the valuable insights of Dr. Prakash Khanna and Dr. Budavati. Today's discussion will help us in better understanding the dynamics of party politics in West Bengal. I would also like to thank our audience for turning up in large numbers and for participating and asking questions. There's an arrangement of snacks at the notice board area. Please go and have tea and snacks. Also, a QR code would also be there, so please also contribute so that we can have more such debates and discussions. We have also invited Suraj India for a lecture on TEMS, so please do join us for the discussion. Details of the event would be shared later. Alright, thank you.